also needs to be shown to be a fully thought out process, not only with the testimony that went in before that grand jury, but also the other evidence that they're going to be using to support these charges. If Alvin Bragg and his office cannot show that this was a well thought out decision to bring this case and present it to a grand jury, and can't show that it's not tainted with any political motivation, then I think that the public is going to lose trust in the process in general, whether you be a Democrat or a Republican. That will just set bad precedent in terms of how someone like Donald Trump, as a former president, is brought up on charges like this, and whether it is purely based on evidence and not a politically motivated prosecution.
All right, and if you're just joining us, we are looking at the hallway inside the Manhattan Criminal Court. Inside right now, as we speak, Donald Trump is before a judge. He walked into the courthouse around 2:29.
You're watching live now from Fox, everyone. Fox 5 coverage continues right now, but what we want to do is come back out to me here for just a moment. We're getting our first glimpse right now of Donald Trump inside of the court hearing there for his arraignment. Let's show that to you right here on Live Now from Fox. And so this is the first image we are seeing of the former president, Donald Trump, with his legal team at the desk there inside of that Manhattan courtroom for the arraignment there, where the charges that are being brought against him are being read out right now. And soon we will be hearing more about this coming up in just moments here on Live Now from Fox. But we wanted to first bring you the first image of Donald Trump there inside of that courthouse. And remember, there would be no video cameras, just still photographers that were allowed to take a couple of shots in the very, very beginning of this hearing, where the arraignment is still ongoing right now. But we wanted to showcase this to you, and really, as soon as we get more info in and more details about the unsealing of that indictment, we will bring it to you. And that's when we're really going to learn a lot more information coming up today about the number of charges that are against the former president and so much more. What we will do now is head back to our team, Fox 5 New York. They continue to break down this coverage here worldwide for us on Live Now from Fox.
It's going to diminish. Usually, typically, they say when they're wheels up means that he's in the plane, he's in the air, he's gone. You always want to maintain security, because if something does happen, you want to be able to bring him back to Trump Tower. It's already secure and it's held tight. So once they're wheels up, that's typically where things are going to relax. But because it is his home base, certain security protocols are always going to remain there consistently in place. And that's not just for the physical security, it's that comms and the communication as well, the street closures and all that opening up. Also, it's also what's happening underground that we're, thinking of as well, locking all that down and making sure he's safe.
Yeah, it has been a whirlwind 24 hours. Wheels up seems to be sort of one of the finish lines of, okay, we can take a little bit of deep breath and sort of relax a little bit. And again, if you are just joining us, we are looking inside the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse, camera outside the courtroom where Donald Trump is before a judge right this moment, learning the charges he will face here in Manhattan, due to the charges of financial crimes in relation to the Stormy Daniels affair, et cetera, during the 2016 presidential election. So we are about to get a lot more information about the nature of the charges he's facing as soon as we see him step out of that courtroom, where he has been now for at least 15 to 20 minutes. He walked in at 2:29. It's 2:47. So we're pushing 20 minutes now. We have to be, you would think, at the upper end of how long he's going to be in that courtroom before we're told he's going to leave, get back into the waiting SUV, take the caravan back to LaGuardia, get on his private plane, head back to Florida, where we will hear from him tonight. And we're expected to hear from Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg this afternoon to lay out the charges. And also in the split screen, you see there are protesters, counter-protesters nearby in lower Manhattan as well. And, Evie, from a security standpoint, I do have to think Manhattan's a pretty inhospitable place if you're not from here to travel here. It's expensive. It's big. It's spread out. This isn't going to the mall in Washington, D.C. and meeting up there, right? I mean,
an undertaking to come here.
Yeah.
I think New York City is also an intimidating city for a lot of people.
Right.
When I tell people I'm from New York,
of
you always
course,
have
yeah.
that moment. But it's also interesting, too, from the investigative standpoint and listening to your dialogue before, when I would take cases to the U.S. Attorney's offices and how much discretion they would have in not taking a case. And usually I would have to come with really substantial evidence for them to take a case, because they want to make sure that they can indict or pass an information and really be able to prosecute. And going off of that, as I'm listening, you are correct. They really need to make sure that this is locked tight and that they've got substantial information to be able to do this, because people already as a whole, just from the criminal justice perspective, have lost a lot of faith in our system like these last couple of years. And if they're not really locked tight on what they're doing and the substance isn't there, this is going to further deteriorate the faith that people have in the system in general.
Now that said, I mean, no one knows that more than Alvin Bragg. There is no mystery to the idea that this case has to be rock solid, because it's going to be looked at and picked apart from every conceivable angle. Is there a possibility we get a surprise in the extent of how extensive the charges are, and they're more than what we were anticipating as well? I mean,
well, we hear that there's possibly multiple felonies.
Right.
And that, of course, there's different counts, perhaps related to the same falsification of those business records. But I would be interested to see if there's some surprises here. We've had a grand jury proceeding is a secret proceeding. Of course, we've had these leaks of information, these, little bits of information coming out as to what the charges we expect them to be, based on the fact that Michael Cohen's testifying and certain witnesses that went before the grand jury there. But we really don't know for sure yet the extent of the substance of the charges, and we're going to find out. And I would be interested to see if there's other charges that we did not expect to be, levied against Donald Trump in the mix with the falsification of business record charges. But again, going back on making sure that this is a airtight prosecution for Alvin Bragg. Alvin Bragg has been under a lot of criticism, not just for Donald Trump, but just how he's been running the office.
Sure.
And listen, I'm saying that in an objective way, but people have been criticizing Alvin Bragg, and he needs to make sure that this also isn't a losing prospect for him.
That prosecutors do not want to bring cases they don't know they're going to win. Right?
Absolutely.
Right.
If you can't prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt, typically as a prosecutor, you're not going to bring that case. You're not going to say, all right, maybe we have a chance here. Going into the process, and you made a great point, the feds, right, the FBI, the U.S. attorneys, they're all the more, really to the, every bit of evidence needs to be perfect.
Yeah.
As an ADA, when I was in the DA's office, of course, we take everything seriously. We don't bring charges unless that they are warranted, and we have good faith basis that this was a crime committed by an individual. But our processes in New York City, as everything moves fast in New York City, even as an ADA on the state level, our cases typically move faster in terms of when we're, NYPD making an arrest or an indictment being brought, and our detective investigators going out and processing arrests. I would imagine that Alvin Bragg, over his time in the DA's office, also whatever evidence or investigations that were coming over from the Cy Vance era, that they made sure that they had a good faith basis to bring these charges, that they had the evidence to do so. Of course, there's the old adage that the grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. The burden is, it's easy.
And the idea of that is that the people in the grand jury are being presented information from trained prosecutors who know how to get the indictment. I mean, is that what the meaning of that is?
Yeah.
Indict a ham sandwich when you hear that, right?
Right.
That's what that means,
legally,
right?
They consider legally sufficient evidence and reasonable cause to believe that a crime was committed by that individual. That's all. Yeah. Right. So it's a much lesser burden in the grand jury to get an indictment. And when I was an ADA, I was presenting case after case after case in front of the grand jury, and it's almost like a process, and it's something which you control the narrative in many ways as the prosecutor. You are the voice in that grand jury in terms of presenting the evidence, and because of that, the defendant, it's also just charges, right? That presumption of innocence, Donald Trump maintains that. These are just charges. Even though a grand jury votes, it's not a conviction. He still has the presumption of innocence here. The prosecution still needs to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And I would imagine that Alvin Bragg, if he was really making sure that this was thought out and this was a process and a prosecution or an endeavor that he was seeking that's going to be possibly successful, I would imagine that they have thought through that, and I hope they have.
I mean, I take that for granted, honestly. There's no doubt the stakes of this case. You know what I mean? I mean, for sure. And again, and we are getting, here it is. This is some pictures, still images from inside the courthouse. This is the first look we're getting at Donald Trump, flanked by attorneys and court officers. This happened within the last half hour. He is continuing to be in the courtroom as we speak, maybe a little bit longer than people had anticipated. He's been in there since
2:20 or so.
Yeah, 2:19, 2:20. So he's been in there almost 25 minutes at this point.
2:30.
So, yeah.
And when we should know any moment, we should know very soon what exactly those charges are. This is the first time that Donald Trump is even learning what charges have been brought up against him. We'll find out the severity of those charges as well. And then we'll have a press conference from Alvin Bragg at 3:30 Eastern time talking about their evidence behind this.
Yeah, it's going to be sort of an interesting visual. You're going to have Alvin Bragg on one side of your screen, and invariably it's going to be the motorcade or the flight taking off, heading back to Florida of the former president. So certainly, from a visual standpoint, really just a stunning, historic day here in New York City. But again, on the right side of your screen, that is the first image released of the former president in the courtroom where he continues to be at this moment. On the left side of your screen, that's a pool camera set up in the hallway outside the courtroom. We saw him briefly walk into the courtroom at around 2:29. He remains in there right now, and then we're going to see him head back out, head down to the elevator, head to his waiting car. He did not say anything on his way in. He looked very somber, very glum, very businesslike as he headed into the courtroom, as he looks like in the picture as well on the right side. So any moment now, we're about to see the reverse as he exits the courthouse in the courtroom with his attorneys, and it'll be, again, interesting. We heard reporters yelling down the hallway, Mr. Trump, do you have any comment? He did not say a word as he was led into the courtroom itself.
And it's just very interesting. A year ago this week, it seemed like this case was dead in the water. And now here we are, a former president for the first time being arraigned, facing indictment. And once we learn what those charges are and just how severe they are, we can figure out the next steps. But also learning to see if the judge invokes a gag order, what he can and can't talk about, how he's going to react to this too, what he's going to do with if there's a mugshot taken, what his team could do with that too. I mean, he's been wanting to drum up support from his base. I think so far the number was $8 million have been donated to his campaign. Just how Donald Trump will use this as his narrative as he's done in the past, too, for the campaign.
Right. And, as we mentioned yesterday, basically, since this happened, the GOP 2024 nominee has come to a complete halt.
Frozen in place.
Everyone who's even running against him has to line up behind him in support while he goes through this. Now, we know this is a situation that's going to play out probably over at least a year or so, and there are other potential legal issues he's facing as well elsewhere in the country. So a lot of calculations certainly on his part about how he plays this going forward, appealing to his supporters, et cetera, as he right now is obviously the clear runaway frontrunner for the GOP 2024 nomination. I mean, it's not even close.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out, looking at this photo, you see, there's been a sort of a question mark. Who is going to speak during the arraignment for Donald Trump? Of course, Joe Tacopina has been very vocal in media reports and the press. I know Joe Tacopina, but you see the mic is in front of Todd Blanche. That was the attorney that he just tapped in on his team. To Todd Blanche's left is Susan Nicholas. She is also on his team, a great attorney. And then there's Donald Trump, and to Donald Trump's left, there's Joe Tacopina, also a very well-versed and experienced defense attorney. So there you have the team, but based on the seating, right, you typically have the speaking attorney in front of the mic, but also on the right of the defense team.
We have breaking news now. Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to 34 felony counts. So the reporting that came out late last night was accurate. 34 felony counts. Walk us through what you hear as an attorney here, 34 felonies.
I mean, that's substantial. That's, I mean, I don't. I mean, that's the sort of 34 felonies. See, I thought this was my take that we were going to see a mix of felonies and misdemeanors. But if it is 34 felony counts, then Donald Trump is facing a sizable indictment there. I mean, there's 34 counts. I get that, but there was a lot of talk about will Alvin Bragg come out with simply a misdemeanor charge or a misdemeanor indictment, which is typically not done. Misdemeanors are not normally presented to a grand jury and indicted, but that was something that Alvin Bragg could arguably have done or ended up with. But now we hear 34 felony counts is something which is quite substantial for Donald Trump, and you have to think that now his defense team is attacking not one felony count, which is something which is no one wants to experience or face in itself, but 34 felony counts to attack as the defense team there, and 34 counts that Donald Trump is facing as former president, and it's mind-boggling how we've gotten here, but it's something we never have seen, but now the real burden, and of course there's always the burden on the prosecution, but I would say the burden is all the more great just from a public perception standpoint on Alvin Bragg and the Manhattan DA's office to show that this is a indictment that was reached based on the law and the evidence and not motivated by politics, as many people who are criticizing Alvin Bragg and his office are saying.
Now, how does it work? I mean, obviously, as a former president, he put people on the federal bench, on the Supreme Court. How do the rulings work that are handed in Manhattan criminal court? Does that ever get to the feds or no? Or how, this is one of those interesting entanglements that comes with indicting a former president.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously, these are state charges. We've talked about how the enhancement of that misdemeanor could be tied to a federal question of whether an election law and a federal crime was committed and how that will play out. But essentially, what is the appeals process here? So let's say if there is an appeal, it's going from the state Supreme.
As you can see, we are now into this press conference here on Live Now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. This is a live look as our shot just went down of our Fox 5 team as we have multiple shots out there. I also want to put up this shot right now here outside of the courtroom as well. As we are continuing to wait here for a press conference and also potentially former President Donald Trump to walk out of here, of course, we are learning new information that Donald Trump has pled not guilty to 34 felony counts. We're also seeing the first images inside the courtroom there in Lower Manhattan. We also saw Alvin Bragg inside the courtroom as well. This is a live picture right there. As we're also awaiting a press conference coming up very, very momentarily with Alvin Bragg as well. This is just inside the courtroom. I want to continue to put up multiple shots here on Live Now from Fox. I think it's still frozen from the earlier shot. As you can see, the two shots we're looking at right now inside the courtroom and also awaiting the press conference of Alvin Bragg. Soon we'll have this coming up very momentarily as they will likely step out. We're also going to tune back into our Fox 5 team as they are continuing to cover this as well. So we are waiting for all of these shots here on Live Now from Fox. You can see plenty of media presence out there as well. We want to put up just some more shots of what we're seeing from this inside this Manhattan courtroom, this Manhattan courthouse. I got you. Well, there is still awaiting multiple shots. I'm going to put up multiple shots right now. You can see on the left side of your screen inside the courtroom, also top right, soon the press conference with Alvin Bragg, and also this outside, plenty of supporters of President Trump and also people on the other side. So we're following all of those live shots here on Live Now from Fox. Of course, we're learning more and more information as he traveled from Trump Tower earlier today over to the Manhattan courthouse. He's expected to travel back to Florida later tonight and make some remarks in front of supporters there at that residence in Florida. We'll take you out to those comments a little later. They're expected to happen around 8:15 Eastern time. As of now, the time frame might have to be pushed back just based on travel time and the length of this arraignment. So that 8:15 time frame might be pushed back just a little bit, but still waiting on all of these shots here on Live Now from Fox. And so we wait once more here on Live Now from Fox. I'm Andy Mack. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we've seen some images already from earlier as inside the courtroom. I want to put up these images here right now on Live Now from Fox just to give you a sense of what we are looking at. Of course, these images coming out of the courtroom via a pool spray, but I want to put them up right now. As you can see, the former president there inside the courtroom alongside his lawyers, a very stoic face there for the former president. As you can see, taking notes. His lawyers are not in the frame as District Attorney of Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, but former President Donald Trump, an unprecedented historic moment as he is sitting there, would be defined as under arrest after being processed, fingerprinted, potentially taking a mugshot. There are some conflicting reports about that, but also processed through the system there in Manhattan. So likely considered under arrest at that point. Also, a live picture we're looking at right now, just outside of that courtroom, as we are awaiting to potentially see the former president leave the courtroom. Also, District Attorney Alvin Bragg will speak to the media, discuss some parts of this case. We'll potentially learn more about the 34 counts, 34 felony counts that we are learning that former President Donald Trump has pled not guilty to. So that's something that we will hopefully learn more of in the coming minutes here on Live Now. Of course, former president pleading not guilty to 34 counts. Waiting any departures here from this on Live Now. Well, the process is moving at the pace of the judicial system. Of course, we did await President Trump walking through those doors and into the courtroom. It took quite some time. Some media members did speak out and ask if President Trump would say anything. He remained stoic throughout all of that as he entered the courtroom, potentially could speak to some media members on his way out as he departs New York City, potentially going back to Florida as he's expected to have much more tonight. We are also seeing right now our Fox 5 team continues to cover this very closely with legal experts as well. Let's listen into their coverage here on Live Now.
We're going to find out soon enough, but yeah, I am surprised because, you know, what we heard leading up to this was there was the misdemeanor falsification of business records, and then there was the enhancement that would bring it to an E felony, and that's if the falsification was in furtherance of another crime, that being the election law, a violation of the election law. I thought that, okay, could they make that connection? Would maybe a few counts? Would some of those counts just remain misdemeanors? But from what we're seeing here, and again, we don't know exactly what the charges are in total, that DA Bragg was able to get this grand jury to indict the former president on 34 straight felonies.
Now, I mean, this is probably a really dumb question, but is the fact that it's 34 felonies, is that what's to account for the fact that he's been in there almost 40 minutes now? Does that in any way lengthen the proceedings in the courtroom itself, or no? I mean, 40 minutes, I don't think anyone thought it was going to take this long. He would be in the courtroom.
10, 15 minutes,
right,
quick,
in and
quick.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was first of all, there's probably a lot of procedural elements just on the logistics of things, right? You do have members of the press in there who are able to get that ticket, so to say, to be in that courtroom. You do have the still cameras there. There are the security sort of concerns that are following Donald Trump from the moment he left Trump Tower to entering the courthouse, to entering that courtroom. I'm sure there's that is also something that takes time and effort. Then there's also the conjunction. You have the court officers there who typically they're, the kings and queens of their castle in that courtroom, right? That's their courtroom. As court officers, they maintain the order in terms of, from a court officer standpoint, the judge maintains order from the bench, of course. Right. There's all those concerns. But from a legal standpoint, if I was on the defense team for Donald Trump, I would be wanting each count read into the record. I would want to know exactly what my client is facing, not just getting it on paper, but there may be the optics of having a robust record from the court reporter showing exactly what counts there are. And there may be some argument or things placed on the record that if you were just a routine going in there as a defense attorney or a prosecutor presenting a case for indictment, you wouldn't necessarily go into. But you may want that record because everyone is going to be looking to that court reporter and whatever record they are taking down now as being the guiding factor right now, as far as we know, of what the charges are and what the DA intends to present and the timeline going forward, if there's any indication from the judge and also both the prosecutor and the defense team.
Also, from a security standpoint, it's just not when he's done, everybody walks out. You have to get everything staged and ready, the vehicles, the manpower, start making the road closures. It's going to be interesting to see what route are they actually going to take back. Are they going to do the FDR again? FDR might not be a bad route because you want to stay away from the big buildings, the center of the city. So you want to go highway. Highway is always the best. Highway and bridges. You always stay away from tunnels too when you're doing motorcade routes. So you want to get those mechanisms in place before you get him out and you get him exposed. Again, remember, arrival departure points is where he's the most vulnerable.
Sure.
Also, is Trump Tower ready to receive him? They have to secure the area there. So that way, when he arrives, it's seamless. You get him, you move the protectee, you go inside. Again, we want to keep him as safe as possible. And I will tell you, from a security standpoint, New York City is one of the most nerve-wracking cities because it's also who's up top. You can't secure all the buildings, all the windows. So that's why speed and agility is key when it comes to that.
And so now that we know he's facing 34 felony counts, I mean, how many times are we going to have to replay the scene we have today where he's coming into this building over the next year? Dozens?
I would think that this is going to be happening a lot. They're probably going to have a blueprint now. They're going to go in there and secure this building in such a way that it's going to be commonplace. And it's interesting because I've actually been testified before a grand jury, even for the DA, when cases that we work with the NYPD. And, this whole process and seeing it unfold from this whole other perspective of seeing a U.S. president, a former U.S. president going through this and the processes here.
Yeah.
I would love to know what he's thinking. I mean, you've worked with clients who face felonies. It's not a fun process, no matter who you are, to be read these charges against you. I mean, as tough as he might seem or as, stern or serious, I know you can't predict what he's thinking, but, what's your take on your experience working with clients before?
Yeah, well, it's a harrowing experience for a client. I'm not sure if this is a harrowing experience so much for Donald Trump, but possibly a blow to his ego. Being there in that courthouse where criminals or alleged criminals are brought in every day to face charges. Now, he was the 45th president of the United States. he's being brought into 100 Center Street. And listen, he's a New Yorker. He knows 100 Center Street. He knows what goes down in that
It's his
courthouse. He knows the
hometown.
tombs. Exactly.
Yes.
So now he's being brought into 100 Center Street, sitting in front of a judge at a seat where, you know, people accused of heinous crimes are sitting. I would imagine it's a huge blow to his ego.
And I mean, he's not free to come or go. He's not in charge right now. He's in that courtroom, and that's where he has to be, whether he wants to be or not, which must be jarring as well.
They don't address him as Mr. President in the courtroom. It's the judge is proceeding here.
Exactly. You know, the order in that courtroom right now is coming from the bench. And we already see what Donald Trump's opinion of Judge Marchant is based on his social media post. But right now he's sitting there. I can't imagine he's, you know, the pride and ego that Donald Trump has exhibited in the past. I mean, I don't think that's a controversial statement. I think we know that Donald Trump likes to be out there. He likes to be the man in power. He likes to have the microphone in front of him, the one who's really steering the ship. But right now, Donald Trump isn't steering the ship in that courtroom.
Right.
You know, he is sitting there as a criminal defendant. So the process is going through his mind. You know, it's probably emotional. It's probably intense. But I do expect that, you know, he knows his next moves going forward, because he does have a team of defense attorneys who are very skilled. No one is going to argue about that. He really does have a defense roster on his side who know that courthouse, who know the DA's office, who know criminal law and how to practice it here in New York, and also who know how to speak to a New York jury. So that ultimately, at the end of the day, if he is going to trial in this case, he has a team who knows how to speak to that New York jury. So listen, whatever happens behind closed doors between Donald Trump and his attorneys, of course, is privilege. We'll never know. But I think we're going to see a more public process in general than we would see in other ways, especially possibly from Donald Trump himself, making statements out to the press and the media, giving insight, perhaps, what's going on behind closed doors.
And jury selection, I mean, will be interesting. Who doesn't have an opinion on Donald Trump? How are they going to find people?
I mean, they went through it with the grand jury, so it can be done, but it is so interesting to find an impartial jury.
In any given case, you may have a difficult time finding a fair and impartial jury if you have a subject matter going before those jurors that may be controversial or evoke emotion. We talked about the Harvey Weinstein case previously. We had a hard time finding a fair and impartial jury in that case, and arguably that's up on appeal, and we're still saying it wasn't fair and impartial. But you know, in this case, all the more is Donald Trump and the sort of cult of personality that Donald Trump is.
Trumpism.
Yes, and how we find ourselves as a nation now in a micro setting on the island of Manhattan in terms of finding and, you know, doing away with potential jurors if this goes to trial who are so, you know, opinionated about Donald Trump or politics that they can't sit on that jury. It's going to be a very hard task.
Do they go through their social, how thoroughly are people vetted? Do they go through their Facebook and see what they're all about? I mean, you know, those are things I think about.
The process.
How thorough is that vetting? Or is it all just on sort of the honor system?
So it starts with the question and answer process, right? Voir dire, jury selection. You as an attorney, you're speaking to these jurors. And if they're selected for the jury, this is really the time that you get to dive into the brain of a potential juror. So you're doing whatever you can in a limited time frame to gain knowledge of those potential jurors to make sure that you are finding out if they have any inherent biases or opinions that would not allow them to sit on that jury because they can't be fair and impartial. But people are not robots, right? And sometimes they don't answer totally with transparency. Sometimes you have advocate jurors who want to be seated on a particular jury because they have such a strong opinion. They want to be part of it, and they may not be so truthful.
They want to mask their true feelings to get onto the jury.
Exactly. So, you know, it's a process that goes forth. And then after the fact, you have potential jurors who are seated. And if you have the opportunity, then yes, you are looking to find out who that juror is to make sure that they are, in fact, going to be someone who's fair and impartial on their jury.
What's the, you know, I know we're going way, way, way down the line here, but what's the kind of prison time for 34 felony counts?
I would like to, that's a hard question, right? But I don't foresee Donald Trump necessarily being put in jail.
Yeah.
Right? We don't know the charges yet, but based on what we understand and the nature of the charges, this isn't someone who has a lack of a prior criminal record. This is a former president. These are crimes that are not violent in nature. These are crimes that are essentially, in essence, somewhat white-collar crimes, so to say. This is not going to lend itself to jail time for Donald Trump. Right. And I don't think prosecutors, if they're really thinking about the best interest of our country and as a nation in general, they're not necessarily going to be looking for jail time.
What would they view as a win?
I think a conviction, and whatever, listen, there are certain guidelines under the law that charges would anticipate. Could there be a novel sentence if Donald Trump is convicted on one of these charges? Yes. Could it be probation or something like that? Those are options available for someone like Donald Trump, who's facing, again, we don't know the charges, but let's just say they're E-felonies.
Yeah. E-felony being the lowest level. The A would be the most severe. E is the lowest, right?
He's the lowest. And, that's someone who's not looking typically at facing jail time.
Right. First-time offender, as you mentioned, right? No criminal record, et cetera. Yeah. All right. Again, I mean, this is kind of wild at this point. He's been now in that courtroom since 2:30, so pushing 50 minutes he's in there. We found out that he has pleaded not guilty to 34 felony counts. I think that was certainly a surprise to everyone that it was 34 felonies.
Yeah.
It was always, it might be 34 counts and there may be a felony or two in there. The fact that they were all 34 felonies was certainly a bit of a bombshell. Here is a still image from the courthouse. We've got two images thus far that have emerged from the courthouse of him flanked by his lawyers, learning the charges he is facing here in Manhattan. Of course, this has been the subject of much discussion the past couple weeks. He initially on Truth Social a couple weekends ago said through a leak he found out he was going to be indicted. And then about a week ago, we found out he actually was going to be indicted. And it all led to this moment we see right here. Donald Trump in a courtroom looking, I mean, almost sort of dumbfounded and dazed, I would say, by what he just witnessed would be my impression. I mean, that is not someone that looks thrilled to be where they are.
No, and I think at that point, with Donald Trump sitting in court at that table with those charges being read out, I think it all became very real for him. Again, this was an individual who was seated in the Oval Office, and now he's seated in 100 Center Street. That is something very dramatic to wrap your head around, very substantial. And I think perhaps seated there, it became all real and all the more real for Donald Trump that he's facing these charges.
And just to follow up again, 50 minutes thus far and counting.
It's supposed to be a quick process in and out.
What do you attribute that to, if you had to guess?
It could be that his defense team wanted all 34 counts read out, and the basis and the actual charges read out for the record. If I was seated there as his defense attorney, given the fact that all eyes are on that courtroom, given the fact of the gravity of the situation, who my client is, I would want all those counts read out. There's certain just procedures that go forward in arraignment, but typically in an arraignment, the judge seated at that bench and the prosecutors and the defense attorneys who are waiting for their client's case to get called, they need to keep it a revolving door, and in terms of like next case, call the next case, call the next case, and they need to make it an expeditious process. This is anything but the typical situation, right? So this length of time, it surprises me only because from a security standpoint, I thought maybe they would want to expedite this and get him in and out as fast as possible. But from a legal standpoint and also a public image standpoint, having this arraignment and every little minutia put out on the record. Of course, I'm not in that courtroom, none of us are, but I think that could be going on, which is why we see a more longer process.
I feel like everything has been exaggerated in this process, or we've been waiting. Even him getting off the plane yesterday when he landed in LaGuardia, we were sitting here waiting, and finally he came out and he basically just dipped really quickly into his motorcade. I mean,
he's not in charge of this, unlike that.
Yeah,
you know,
not in charge here.
Interesting,
But
right?
he's going to be secure where he's at. So even though he is there, he's in a secure place. They've got it all locked up. You know, and it's interesting too because 34 counts. When I heard that too, felonies. I wonder too if they gave it so many numbers, if you choose 34 counts, is it a bit of a stretch? And is it also in hopes of making sure something sticks? Because now they have to fight 34 felony counts. They have to disprove all those things rather than having one or two where you're so much more focused. But if you're giving this breadth, and typically in the criminal justice system, sometimes if you do want to try to get somebody, the more counts you have, you're just hoping, you're thinking, okay, maybe they'll push this one, this one, this one. But if I can just get a couple of these to stick, but to get all 34 counts either dismissed or to be found not guilty, that would be a much harder thing to do.
Indeed. Right. All right, let's go to, we have our reporter, Linda Schmidt. She's live outside the courthouse, or really along with the rest of the world media right now. Like the rest of us, waiting for the former president to emerge from court. Linda, a fascinating afternoon. He is still in that courtroom. He's been there now almost an hour. What's the reaction going on where you are in Lower Manhattan?
Yeah, Stephen, it's really interesting when you think about it, because originally his attorney, Joe Tacopina, said he expected this process to be swift, 20 to 30 minutes. He clearly was wrong about that. Outside the courthouse right now, I'm going to go ahead, because earlier the protesters, and they are just feet away from us, that park is right next to us, cheering, a lot of drum beating, a lot of yelling. It has been very, very quiet over the past 45 minutes. As you can see, people who are supporting Trump, those who are against Trump, just lining the fence right here inside the park. They are looking at criminal court right now here in Lower Manhattan, and they are waiting to hear the details of exactly what is going on inside the arraignment. Now, you guys are talking about the 34 counts and them all being felonies. Prior to the arraignment, Joe Tacopina, the president's attorney, one of them, said there is zero chance, absolutely zero chance, that he is going to enter a plea deal. Now, this case, if it does go to trial, it's about a year away. So then that's going to coincide, of course, with the 2024 election season. So we're going to have to wait and see how that plays out. They did not take a mugshot of him. He was fingerprinted, but they did not take a mugshot. However, the New York Times reporter is reporting that a fake mugshot has been plastered on T-shirts by his campaign, his 2024 campaign, and they are now going to be available for sale. But that is a fake mugshot, so don't be fooled by that if you end up seeing it. One of the things, and this is really going to play into this, and some of your experts were talking about this earlier.
Heading back into the...
And you just see there former President Trump walking out of the courtroom here on Live Now from Fox. As the arraignment now comes to an end, certainly almost an hour long. You just heard from our Fox 5 team as they were discussing a lot of these elements here. We're also awaiting on a press conference coming in from Alvin Bragg, the DA right there. Of course, we haven't seen Alvin Bragg quite leave the courtroom as of yet, but this is going to be the scene we're going to see just moments as the DA of this case, this prosecutor from Manhattan, will speak about these 34 counts. Of course, I want to put up the image one more time of former President Trump leaving the courthouse after this arraignment here on Live Now from Fox. As it just happened very, very quickly. Of course, still not speaking with people there in that courtroom, but this happening just a moment ago. This was what you saw as we saw former President Trump leave the courtroom. There you can see people walking out of the courtroom and heading out the hallway. Something we're following very, very closely. You can see the former president there just moments ago leaving the courtroom with plenty of officials and security on hand at this downtown Manhattan courthouse as he has pled not guilty to 34 counts there. So we will continue to follow this very, very closely here on Live Now from Fox. Another look right now, as you can see, the press conference set up for Alvin Bragg. We're getting plenty of different shots here from around the courthouse right now. Outside of the courthouse, you can see plenty of officials and New York City police members there on the ground as they continue to follow this as well. You can see just the motorcade there, potentially former President Trump getting in it as he will leave and go to Mar-a-Lago once more, Florida, as he's expected to make a speech one more time later on tonight. That is the shot out there right now. Of course, we also have an overhead shot. You see they just changed this motorcade there right now as the former president will depart here. It took about an hour, that arraignment did, as he pled not guilty to 34 criminal charges there. Of course, hopefully we'll learn more about what those criminal charges were in this press conference with Alvin Bragg coming up in mere moments. We will take you out to that as soon as we can, but there are still plenty of people on the ground, both supporters of the former president as well as people on the other side. I want to put up all the images we have right now. You can see just the motorcade on the move right now very quickly after departing that area. Let's jump right back into our Fox 5 team in New York as they continue to do a great job covering all of this. Let's listen into what they have to say as they continue to cover them leaving and heading back to Florida.
To you. And then when you get closer to the airport, Port Authority is really actually the law enforcement entity that secures the airport. So at that point, NYPD will do this handoff when he gets to the airport. But here you are, you can see the people over to the right. You've got people watching, so they've got police presence there, barricades, barriers set up for that, motorcades moving through the city at a pace, and you can see them going. More than likely, what I predict is they're going to move toward the FDR. Again, speed is our friend, so we want to stay away from the center of the city. We want to stay away from people, the potential of anybody even running up to the vehicles, touching the vehicles, tapping the vehicles, any other cars coming towards the vehicles. Again, safety is key. So you can see them moving through.
And as clear as a route as you can get here, too.
Oh, they've completely swept up the whole area, right? You push all the vehicles out. You don't want anybody near you, but although we do see the oncoming traffic there stopped and frozen, so there's still somebody there close by. But when you're doing these routes, you're also thinking, if something were to happen, you have a lot of protocols put in place. So, for example, if something were to happen, what's the nearest hospital he's going to go to? They typically designate a hospital for any type of emergency situation. And there's actually agents there standing by for something like that. You're also going to designate what we call safe houses. Where would you take the president at any given moment in time within the route to a safe house, a place that you would actually secure him should something happen, a place where you can actually hold him.
Right. So just highly choreographed, of course, as you'd expect, and certainly a fascinating sight. I mean, imagine the people who are just going about their lives, certainly by this part in the route. Maybe they're just walking along their daily life.
Just another day.
There goes Donald Trump from the courthouse. It's a pretty wild, surreal sight, no doubt about it, as he is heading towards LaGuardia Airport. And really a whirlwind 24 hours or so.
Absolutely. 5 years in the making, this investigation. Again, a year ago this week, we thought that this investigation dead in the water. Alvin Bragg resurrected it, and here we are today where former President Donald Trump facing 34 felony counts. He's pleaded not guilty, and this is just the start now. We need to find out more about these felony counts, what they entail. We'll hear from DA Alvin Bragg around 3:30 is what we were told, so we'll have to see when he'll come out to speak to reporters. And, you know, we've got the 2024 election in play here, campaigning in play. We'll see what Trump is going to say, what his reaction will be. We've heard that he's wanting to speak outside of Mar-a-Lago when he goes back to Florida. We'll see if he listens to his legal team on not attacking the judge and you know, the legal process. From that's kind of what we've been seeing the days leading up to this moment too from him. But it is such a historic moment.
Yep, and as you mentioned, yep, he's going along the FDR. I can see off in a preview monitor, they've got the podium set up for Alvin Bragg. Eventually, he's going to take to that and break down. Here's a look inside right now. We're waiting to hear from the Manhattan DA about the 34 felony counts that he just charged Donald Trump with as the former president's on the FDR. making his way back to LaGuardia to awaiting airplane and heading back to Florida tonight. We're expected to hear from him. And again, at this point, we still don't know the charges, whether there's been a gag issue, things like that. So that's where we're going to learn a lot from Alvin Bragg. And Linda Schmidt standing by. We had to break away from her when the former president left the courthouse. We want to get back to you, though, and just sort of check back in and see what the mood is down there.
Well, you know, Steve and Natasha, we all keep talking about the news conference that DA Alvin Bragg is going to be having, and he's going to be having that shortly, but it doesn't mean he's going to be taking questions. There have been many times where the DA will come out, whether it's DA Bragg or any other DA that I've covered in my time here in New York City. They may come out and just read a statement, make a statement, that's it, and that's the end of the story. Or he may, in fact, end up taking questions. Now, as far as the mood is out here, it is much quieter than what it was before. That's because the crowds out here have no idea really what's going on. Nobody can see the video. Nobody can see the pictures. So most of these folks here are just kind of hoping that they're going to get a glimpse of the president. And I had to just tell some of the folks here that he's left the building already. This is an area here where they had set up some additional barricades before Trump had arrived this afternoon. This is keeping the public at bay here. And this is out in front of State Supreme Court, which is right across the street from the criminal courthouse. Additional barricades, of course, plenty of police officers down here, whether you're talking about court officers, NYPD, here throughout the streets in Lower Manhattan. Now, Trump, from what his attorney had told us, Joe Tacopina had told us earlier this week and last week, he said there is zero chance that he is going to be entering a plea deal. That is not going to happen. Now, if this does go to trial, that trial is more than a year away. This event today kicking off an historic criminal case here. Now, as he had walked down the hallway to go into court and walking in that same hallway coming out of court, prior to that happening, there had been some reports that, yes, he was going to stop and he was going to have something to say to the media. Obviously, his three attorneys advised him against doing that. They wanted this to be as seamless, as quiet, as uneventful as it possibly could be. So he was stone-faced. He walked down that hallway. He walked in. He sat at the defense table, something we have never seen before in U.S. history. A former president or even a sitting president sitting in a courtroom about to be arraigned on criminal charges, now facing 34 felony counts. Now, one of the things that I wanted to mention here to you guys, because we have been talking about this, we started talking about it yesterday when he had added to his legal team. Now, the attorney, he's a man by the name of Todd Blanche. Now, he is a very well-respected white-collar criminal defense attorney. He had worked and he had been a prosecutor in the office of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District. So he knows how to handle felony counts. He knows how the system works. He had also represented Paul Manafort. If you remember, he is the former campaign chairman for Donald Trump from his 2016 campaign. And Paul Manafort, back in 2019, had faced charges, mortgage fraud charges, as well as others, under then DA Cy Vance. Well, attorney Todd Blanche represented him there, and he was the lead in leading him to a successful case and eventually got those charges dropped. Of course, Donald Trump knows this. He's paying attention to this. He's a New Yorker. Plus, obviously, he's paying attention to anybody who is associated with him and whatever is happening with any of their court cases. So Todd Blanche resigned from a very prestigious law firm to join and now become a three-member legal team, and there might even be more additions coming down the road. And by the way, that's not something that is odd at all. That has happened many times in cases, any type of criminal case. And the fact, too, that Donald Trump himself said not guilty in court, we knew that was going to happen. Joe Tacopina, his attorney, had told us that. And also, that is really nothing new either. I have covered trials in multiple courts here in New York and New Jersey. And it is not uncommon for the defendant to stand up and say either guilty or not guilty. Donald Trump decided to do that on his own today and say not guilty, which, again, is really not out of the ordinary. But nonetheless, a historic day. Very quiet out here now. If you remember earlier in the day, lots of drum beating and cheering and yelling and people coming and going. Very, very quiet now, because a lot of these folks here, whether they are pro-Trump or anti-Trump, still aren't aware of what happened in court. Not looking at their phones, apparently, because they have no idea what's going on. They're waiting to see from us, and they keep asking us what's happening. So that's the atmosphere here now. But again, Alvin Bragg going to be having that news conference today, but he may or may not take questions. Back inside to you.
All right, Linda, yeah, that's the next really big milestone in today. We're waiting to hear from Alvin Bragg, but the extent to which he relays a lot of information remains to be seen. As she mentioned, he may not take questions. It might be a very short statement. But as of this moment, we still don't know what the 34 felony charges are that he's facing. So that press conference from the DA will certainly put that to rest. But how much more information we'll get out of him remains to be seen. We'll take you to that live as soon as that happens, of course.
But it is interesting, Imran, just kind of talking to Linda there about Todd Blanche. I mean, Trump took this seriously, bolstered his legal team. He's watching, and you say that his legal team there, you know, Joe Tacopina, Todd Blanche, Suzanne Nicholas, I mean, these are a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're all in their own right skilled attorneys, and they have different specialties, right? They're all defense attorneys. But as you hear, Todd Blanche comes from Cadwalader. That was the firm that he just resigned from in order to take on this defense. Other individuals in that firm were also involved with the Manafort case, as you just heard, and also the Weisselberg case. He's resigned to take on this defense for Donald Trump, and he comes from a pedigree, if you will, in terms of a legal background out of the federal system with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and he's a white-collar crime defense attorney. Then you have Joe Tacopina. Joe Tacopina, he's a defense attorney who takes on cases, federal cases, state cases, but he has a great sort of New York way about him. And if this case is going to be tried in New York, that's someone who's going to speak to a New York jury. So everyone's filling a role here. Suzanne Nicholas, she is an attorney with a great grasp of the law. Of course, all his defense attorneys are, but she also plays a certain role on that team. You know, and just also the fact she's a female attorney. It diversifies the sort of defense bench, if you will. And I'm not, you know, differentiating gender for any particular reason, but these are the thought processes that we as attorneys have in mind when we're thinking about the optics to the jury. Who's going to speak to whom on the jury? Are we going to put forth sort of a diverse defense team that the jury can relate to? We are essentially the voice for our client. You know, not in many cases, a defendant will not testify in a criminal case. They rely on their defense attorneys to handle all their sort of advocacy and be their voice. And that's why you want to have a team which is diversified, have different skill sets, who are great attorneys, both on paper and also when they're arguing in front of a jury. And I think that Donald Trump's team really reflects all those different components.
Very well. You know, let's go out to our colleague, Ashley Rodriguez. She's also out by the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, where things have been blissfully event-free so far, which is great to see, certainly so far today. Ashley, just walk us through what it's been like down there, what the mood is now. Are the people aware that the president has already come and gone? Walk us through what it's like down there right now at this time.
Yeah, I'm going to have to echo Linda. It's quiet now, and for the first time, I can actually see across Collect Pond Park. It's really emptying out. The energy is leveling off. So we have the anti-Trump protesters. They're really cleared out. I mean, they were pretty outnumbered the whole day, but they have definitely cleared out, as well as the pro-Trump supporters. And as you mentioned, it has been pretty uneventful, which is good. The commissioner, the NYPD commissioner, and the mayor would be very happy about that. There have been some flare-ups of tensions. And what happened was, with this park, they pretty much put up barricades and separated the two sides. It's when the two sides merged or came together, that's when you saw the tension flaring up throughout the day. I'm actually standing right near a walkway, and we have video of this. I can show you an example of one of these tensions flaring up situations. I'm standing near a walkway that was leading into the anti-Trump protesters, and when pro-Trump supporters would come in, it would just cause chaos. I actually took a walk around the park recently, and it was more chaotic outside of this area. It's because they were separated, things were really peaceful throughout the day. And what happens is once people start shouting and getting into each other's faces, it becomes mob mentality, and you just see a bunch of people just start ganging up and causing even more trouble, making a little scuffle even bigger than it should be. But I can tell you the majority of people on the anti-Trump side, they were local New Yorkers who just have had a strong dislike of Trump for decades now. I mean, they told me that they just felt like he's been a crook for a long time and he was getting away with it, and they do not believe that he is above the law, and they were very happy to come out here and, make their voices heard. But for the most part, back here live, you can see behind me that people are at least keeping tabs on what's going on, because as soon as Trump had left the building, people started clearing out. And again, we're just concerned as they clear out outside of this area, what it's going to do, what it's going to be like, and, people interacting with each other with opposing views, if it's going to cause any issues. The NYPD has been out here all throughout the day, very strong, heavy presence. They have not been getting involved. When little scuffles would flare up, they would just stand by and watch. Their presence alone kind of mitigating it and taking it even further. But something I noticed was their NYPD Community Affairs team. They did an excellent job of stopping any issues before they started. They're the gentlemen, if you can see behind me, in bright blue jackets. And once they see somebody who's starting issues, they go directly. They make a beeline for that person, and they kindly ask them to leave the area. And again, most of the time, the tensions, the issues that we saw was when one of the supporters or the anti-Trumpers would, cross lines, cross sides, and try to make an issue of it. So they would move in very quickly. I think they're actually talking to a gentleman right now who has a megaphone and is being, slightly obnoxious to people, which is going to cause a fight. They made a beeline for him. They're escorting him out. So really, it's been very peaceful out here. We'll see how it does now that people are leaving and flooding the surrounding streets and the city. We'll send it back to you.
Ashley, thank you. We want to go now to Morgan Mackay, who is on the phone, who was in the courtroom. Morgan, tell us everything. Walk us through what you saw. Donald Trump's seeing him for the first time. Morgan Mackay on the phone now joining us again. She was in the courtroom. Morgan?
Yes, Stephen and Tasha, former President Donald Trump entered the courtroom a little after 2:30 today, and he entered a plea of not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Now, he's due back in court on December 4th. Now, his lawyers did say that they were hoping that he didn't have to appear, just citing the immense cost on the city that this entire arraignment has cost to the city, with NYPD officers outside and just with all the media, just what a huge burden this has been on the city. But the judge said respectfully, while he understands that Trump still has to appear in court on December 4th. Now, the entire process lasted about an hour, and the Manhattan District Attorney's Office went over a couple of issues that they saw could be arising in the next couple of months. The first one, of course, is Trump's rhetoric on social media. They said that he has posted a, quote, death and destruction if he was to be charged. They said he even referred to World War III. So they were asking that the judge consider placing a protective order, asking that he walk some of those statements back and make sure that he doesn't post such inflammatory comments. Now, the judge said that they aren't going to be doing any sort of gag order, but he did ask the defense and the prosecution to make sure that their witnesses know that they can't have immense rhetoric on social media, on TV interviews, and so forth. They were also worried about Joe Tacopina, Trump's lawyer. They said that he has a conflict of interest, saying that he, at one point, conferred with the adult film star Stormy Daniels, who is being referenced in this case, and that he almost took her case. Now, Tacopina said that he only reviewed evidence, one piece of paper that was sent to him when Stormy Daniels was trying to attain Tacopina as her lawyer. He said that everything that he saw is already in Daniel's book. So he said that it's already been public information. So the judge said he wasn't going to remove Tacopina as a lawyer, but he did tell Trump that if he wanted a new lawyer without a conflict of interest, he has a right to do so. And Trump acknowledged this and moved on. But besides that, the indictment itself is expected to be unsealed later today. And the defense has about 65 days to turn over any evidence that they might have. Steve, Natasha?
You know, and Morgan, it is interesting that you were actually in the courtroom. Of course, you could only jot down notes with pen and paper, right? Walk us through the process of how you got in there, what it was like being in there, how many people were in there with you. I think what a fascinating vantage point you had this afternoon.
Oh, exactly. So everyone had a color-coded card that they were allowed in. So the green card allowed you access into the same courtroom as Trump, and that was the one that people were standing outside in line since yesterday at 4 p.m. A lot of big media organizations were even paying journalist students to wait outside in this line to get inside to make sure they had this green card to be inside the courtroom with Trump. Then you had 2 overflow rooms. So you had a yellow card and a white card. I had a white card, so I was in one of the overflow rooms directly across from the courtroom that Trump was at. And security was tight. We had to go through 2 separate metal detectors. I would say there was about 30 cops on the 15th floor, just directing traffic. But they were very friendly. There was just an extreme amount of police presence in there, being very, very careful, checking. Even though I went through the metal detectors, they were still standing me down. They had dogs out there. You could hear the helicopters outside. And Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg entered the courtroom around 2:12, and he sat in the second row. So they had the entire front row of the courtroom where Trump was at cleared out for security purposes. And then in the aisle, for each aisle, there was a police officer standing in the aisle of each row facing the journalists that were sitting there. And that was something else. A representative of 20 media organizations also spoke at the beginning of the arraignment, asking for just increased transparency throughout this entire process. They said that they would hope that any discovery materials get handed over pretty quickly to news organizations, just in an effort of transparency, because, again, still cameras were only allowed in there for maybe 2 minutes, if that. They just came in very briefly after Trump sat down, took some pictures, and then they had to leave. So a lot of people are just really pushing for increased transparency throughout this entire process. They also mentioned how the lawyers testifying and Trump, when he was sitting down, he wasn't facing the journalists that were inside the room. So they were also talking about maybe moving some monitors around so you could see facial expressions throughout the trial when there is one. And they were also talking about, one more note there, that the trial, they are pushing for a trial beginning of January next year. This is what the defense, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office is pushing for. The defense, on the other hand, Trump's lawyers, they were saying that they don't possibly want the beginning of next year. They're kind of looking for more of spring of 2024.
That's interesting, and we've got our legal expert on set. So already the next court date's 8 months from now, and from what Morgan just said, they're hoping to push it back further and further, gets closer to 2024.
Yeah, no, and I think, listen, the months to come, it's going to be a lot of work, right? A lot of work for the defense team and also a lot of work for prosecution in terms of what we're going to see in terms of the attack from the defense team. But yeah, this is already we have a substantial amount of time in the grand scheme of things between the arraignment date today and the next court date. But there's going to be a lot of work going on in the process, and there may be critical events related to these charges that we see regarding falsification of business records, 34 counts, 34 felony counts, in the way that the defense team is going to attack this. And of course, I keep talking about the defense team because we're talking about Donald Trump as the defendant, and their next moves are going to be all the more interesting than the prosecution, because the prosecution has their indictment. They have done their job in terms of getting an indictment. Now the ball's in the defense court in many ways, right? So the moves that the defense team that we see in the photograph there, they take now, having the indictment in their possession, having the dates that to consider, having the specific facts behind the indictment counts before them, and the discovery process. Now, in New York State, we have a discovery process. The new discovery law is, where the prosecution have a free flow of evidence and discovery to the defense. Back in the day, so to say, you had to file motions. You had to really actively seek out discovery as a defendant. Now it's almost like an open book, right? Open file discovery, and the prosecution is going to be giving that discovery over to the defense team. It's going to be interesting to see how the judge maintains sort of decorum over this process. And we heard right now that the thought process about a gag order or limiting the ability for the parties, particularly Donald Trump and his team, about talking about that evidence, we'll see how that plays out. But I think most likely what we heard today was a warning that, rather than extrajudicial statements from Trump, his team, or even the prosecution, this needs to be a process that plays out in the court of law, not necessarily the court of public opinion.
While we have Morgan on the phone, Morgan, I am curious, what was the demeanor of the former president when being read these charges? Can you give us a little bit of color commentary, some insight on, facial expressions, what you saw his team, just the overall demeanor of how the former president handled the situation?
Yeah, so when former President Donald Trump entered the courtroom, he had a very solemn expression on his face, and he stared straight forward for a lot of it. When the Manhattan District Attorney's Office was speaking, he did actually look at them. He was paying attention. He was looking down at notes his lawyers were handing him, and he was looking at his lawyers when they were speaking. He was very much involved in the process once it started. But right before that, he was looking straight ahead with a very solemn expression on his face. Now, what your expert was speaking about in terms of a warning, that's exactly what the judge said he was doing today. He was saying that he was issuing a warning right now for all of this, and it could change. He could have to step in. But right now they are discussing, both teams, just ways that they can make sure that this case isn't broadcasted. But they did mention, Trump's attorneys, the need to have at least some of this that Trump can talk about, just because he is going through a presidential election. This is something that is so public and so pertinent to his election.
Yeah, very well said. No, so certainly we heard the warning from the judge not to fire off too many inflammatory tweets, things like that.
Right.
Does that free up the prosecution in any way to talk more about the case than they otherwise would? The idea of a gag order working both ways.
Well, typically the prosecution is going to rely on their accusatory instrument, right? You don't necessarily have prosecutors out there, taking the podium and giving press, we'll have a press release now, or a press conference with Alvin Bragg, because the public wants to know, right? And they want to hear from him. But as the case progresses, typically you don't see a prosecutor, the DA, out there talking about an active prosecution. That typically doesn't happen. And I think that's going to be the case here. The prosecution have their indictment. A grand jury has voted to indict Donald Trump. And ultimately, the evidence that the prosecution has is going to be put to the test by the defense and brought before a jury. We don't expect a plea in this case, and it's going to be a jury that's going to evaluate that evidence and have the final say at the end of the day. But I don't expect that Alvin Bragg or his office will be out there continually issuing updates. It's going to speak for itself as it plays out in court.
Gotcha. All right. And let's go out to Jody Goldberg. She is by LaGuardia Airport. We're told the president is close to arriving, of course, to get back on his private plane that he arrived in yesterday, 25 hours ago, and head back to Florida. Jody, just set the scene for us by LaGuardia. What's going on there right now?
Steve, Natasha, for the first time all day, we're seeing some helicopters flying above, which is an indicator, of course, of Trump making his way back to LaGuardia, where less than 24 hours ago he landed to go to this arraignment. Now, his plane has been on the tarmac the entire time. We've been here since 10 o'clock this morning. And take a closer look. Let's zoom on in so you could see it. It's been here. This is where the former president will arrive in just a short amount of time for his flight back to Florida. And the goal is,
of course, to get him out of here as quickly and safely as possible. And it's, for the most part, been business as usual. No stopping of the flights that we have noticed. Former President Trump is expected to speak tonight at Mar-a-Lago, and the exact route that he's taking here is something that's orchestrated very carefully, and it's very coordinated by Secret Service. We, of course, will bring you any movement as it happens. He is expected to get back on his plane any moment. Within the next few minutes, we will bring it to you. That's the latest here. Let's send it back to you.
Very well.
Jody, thank you. It's also interesting, Trump's legal team is hoping that he doesn't have to appear in person. They were trying to pleading their case to the judge, saying that it's causing such a big burden to the city. All of the extra NYPD officers that we've had to rehire or had to work overtime and bringing in extra agencies.
Well, we pay. People don't realize you pay for that. All those bodies that you saw out there, NYPD, that's coming from taxpayer money. All the assets that go into place, the barricades, all of that comes from taxpayer money. So when Morgan was speaking actually about that, that's actually a valid point. The U.S. Secret Service, actually, the federal government foots a bill. So every time a president or former U.S. president goes into to any location, they have to pay for that police presence. So I really do think that's a valid point, and especially when you're coming to New York City, that bill is huge.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
And that's always been some beef between NYPD and City Council last month. City Council accusing NYPD of being lavish in their spending. And
overtime, overages, things like
but
that,
you
right?
need it. You need the support.
It, of course.
You're dealing with a city that's got so many people, so many characters of people as well. You have to lock things down.
Yeah.
And, and you're looking also at Port Authority. There's all these different entities. Everybody plays a role. You bring them to a very congested city, a very busy city, a city that does have crime, and these are things you're going to have to do. It happens every time there's any type of protectee. In fact, I remember when we would work here in the New York field office, anytime a high-level protectee would come in, or the president, there was kind of this moment of, okay, who's going to pay for this? Because there's always a dollar tag attached to this.
Yeah. No, it is interesting. All right, so we've got the paperwork now on set.
Yeah,
You've been
copies.
pouring through it when you've had a moment. What's your initial reaction to what you see in front of you?
Well, we have 34 felony counts, as we've discussed. They're all falsifying business records in the first degree. So that's that E-felony.
Hi, as a physician, I like to help people. A lot of men are having sexual problems. At Manhattan Medical, we use high-frequency sound waves to stimulate the body, creating new blood vessels and
We're just listening in there to our Fox 5 team out of New York. Sorry for that, as we continue to cover this major story here on Live Now from Fox. Of course, upcoming very momentarily, Alvin Bragg expecting to have that press conference where we'll learn more about the indictments that were just coming down right now. We're also getting a live picture as former President Trump is heading to LaGuardia Airport for his plane. You can see the plane on the tarmac. As you can see, they're approaching it really quickly, but this is the plane as he'll head back to Mar-a-Lago tonight to make that speech. So we're following all of this right now here on Live Now from Fox. I want to put up just some statements and the indictment and statements of fact from Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney. So this coming in right here on Live Now from Fox. I'm going to read these very long statements, very lengthy statements right now, as Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg today announced the indictment of Donald J. Trump, 76, for falsifying New York business records in order to conceal damaging information and unlawful activity from American voters before and after the 2016 election. During the election, Trump and others employed a, quote, catch and kill scheme to identify, purchase, and bury negative information about him and boost his electoral prospects. Trump then went to great lengths to hide this conduct, causing dozens of false entries in business records to conceal criminal activity, including attempts to violate state and federal election laws. It continues on saying Trump is charged in the New York State Supreme Court indictment with 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Of course, I'm going to put this up alongside a potential press conference coming out and continue to read here. According to court documents and statements made on the record in court from August 2015 to December 2017, Trump orchestrated his catch and kill scheme through a series of payments that he then concealed through months of false business entries. In one instance, American Media Inc., AMI, paid $30,000 to a former Trump Tower doorman who claimed to have a story about a child Trump had out of wedlock. Of course, in a second instance, AMI paid $150,000 to a woman who alleged she had a sexual relationship with Trump when Trump explicitly directed a lawyer who then worked for the Trump organization as Trump's special counsel to reimburse AMI in cash. The special counsel indicated to Trump that the payment should not be made via a shell company and not by cash. AMI ultimately declined to accept reimbursement after consulting their counsel. In a third instance, 12 days before the presidential general election, the special counsel wired $130,000 to an attorney for a adult film actress. The special counsel, who has since pleaded guilty and served time in prison for making the illegal campaign contribution, made the payment through a shell corporation funded through a bank in Manhattan. After winning the election, Trump reimbursed the special counsel through a series of monthly checks, first from Donald J. Trump, the trust there created in New York to hold the Trump organization's assets during Trump's presidency, and later from Trump's bank account. In total, 11 checks were issued for a phony purpose. 9 of those checks were signed by Trump. As we were seeing here on Live Now from Fox, I was reading that statement as we can see the plane there on LaGuardia Airport as they were, Trump heading back to Florida to make that speech later on tonight. We're going to re-cue that moment up here real quickly as we continue to read all of these statements here on Live Now from Fox. I'm going to continue to read what Alvin Bragg said as all these feeds coming in right now. We will re-cue it momentarily. I want to finish these statements. Each check was processed by the Trump organization, illegally disguised as a payment for legal services rendered pursuant to a non-existent retainer agreement. In total, 34 false entries were made in New York business records to conceal the initial covert $130,000 payment. Further, participants in the scheme took steps that mischaracterized for tax purposes the true nature of the reimbursements. So that is the full statement from the Manhattan District's Attorney's Office here that we're watching here on Live Now from Fox. We'll hopefully hear from Alvin Bragg himself momentarily as this press conference will likely get underway very, very soon. This is the live picture, as you can see, soon coming up. Alvin Bragg, the press conference there. As we're following here on Live Now from Fox, we just saw just a moment ago, though, former President Donald Trump arriving at LaGuardia Airport. I want to take you out to this moment just a little bit ago as he heads back to Florida. As this was the moment he heads to the airport, you can see him getting out of that black vehicle there and walking up the steps at LaGuardia Airport on his Boeing 757. He arrived just about 24 hours ago in New York City for this arraignment. There, the former president departing after this arraignment after pleading not guilty to those 34 felony counts in that Manhattan courthouse earlier today. So there's former President Trump heading back to Mar-a-Lago. He's expecting to make some remarks later on tonight. The initial schedule was 8:15 Eastern. So depending on time frame and when he gets back, that is still what we're kind of planning on right now. But that is what we just saw just moments ago. We're also watching our Fox 5 team from overhead as former President Trump pleading not guilty to those 34 felony counts here on Live Now. We're watching it very, very closely. Let's continue to follow and join our Fox 5 team out of New York as they continue to cover this major story.
Off before the other commercial flights can take off and then go from there. But yes, whenever you're doing a site advance, the site is the location of where the president is, his home site. You want to, it's already set up. You have a perimeter there. You want to monitor the vehicles going in and out because it's not just people. You have to think about from, again, a tactical perspective, explosives, devices, vehicles passing through. One of the things that's really, really important are vehicles passing through, any explosives, anything somebody can do, any type of mobile attack.
One was interesting as we were watching it live on TV, just you could see in the background all the people who could see it live from their apartments in Queens, there were just so many people who were in plain view of the plane coming and going.
It's very stressful.
Yeah,
I'm watching it here from the camera system. I have to hold on. I have moments.
Yeah.
It's a very stressful thing because look, regardless of who it is, you are responsible for that person's life. And it's whether you like President Trump or not, that's not the point. It's the symbolic nature of what it means if something like this happens. It happens on American soil, and especially if it happens in New York soil. Nobody wants anything. There's a term that we would have, not on my watch. And you don't want anything to happen on your watch.
Yep. All right. We're taking a live look. Okay, we're going to go to Lisa. We continue to wait to hear from Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, but let's go to Lisa Evers first, who is live outside the courthouse. Lisa, luckily, really nothing major to report as far as protests, clashes, et cetera, that we've seen thus far. What's your experience been today?
Well, Steve, right now, the atmosphere here and the whole vibe is almost kind of like a street fair because a lot of the people have left. There's some diehard supporters. This was the side of the park, the north side of the park, that was devoted by police to those who were opposed to President Trump. It's thinned out quite a bit right now. And then these barricades, the NYPD has been here all afternoon. And at various times, the way they moved, their whole strategy was there were moments where there were heated exchanges. People were yelling at each other from other sides across these barricades. And they were basically just staying put in case things got out of hand and turned physical. But luckily, they never did. And then on this side, as you can see, this is the pro-Trump side, where there has been a steady stream of people coming in, other people going, and this was also where there's been just a lot of focus from people saying things like, they're here to support President Trump because they feel he supported them. They also feel that this was a prosecutorial persecution, that former President Trump was being persecuted because of who he is and what he stood for, and that this was not fair, and that they wanted to show him some support. But it's been extremely peaceful, and the whole security plan that's been in place by the NYPD, which was to surround the entire park, have officers basically on deck, on standby, ready to go if things got out of hand. It worked perfectly because when things did get heated, there were people that had flags that had very long poles on them, and they were waving them around. That got a little bit tense. We were in the middle of that for a couple of minutes, but by and large, it's been extremely peaceful. Everybody's respected everybody's opinion, and even when they heard the news of what had happened with the 34-count felony indictment, everybody was just, they got along basically, and so it's a much calmer atmosphere right now because there's far fewer people. They still have NYPD officers who've been around the area here all day since early this morning, and then all throughout the day, ready to move. And it's just so far so good. We're almost through with it, and people have been here in very peaceful means. They've expressed their views, and even when they have disagreed with each other, they've respected each other. Nothing has gotten physical. A lot of handmade signs here too, as well, and just a very good vibe right now. I mean, people are calm. They're accepting what's going on, and they just felt like they had to come out and express their opinion, which many of them did. And hundreds came through here earlier throughout the day, over the course of the day, and they've left. But it's very calm atmosphere here right now at this time, Steve.
Like best case scenario to me. I mean, certainly that's what we would have hoped for heading into this whole situation. So that's great to see, Lisa. We appreciate your perspective. And now we're going to go live to LaGuardia. It looks like Donald Trump's plane's about ready to fly back to Palm Beach. We're looking live, zoomed in, as you can see, the American flag on the back of the plane. And now we are going to go back to Morgan Mackay, who actually had the remarkable perspective of being in the courtroom. No phones, no video, whatnot, but she was there. She witnessed it in person. And Morgan, I am curious, the idea that it was 34 felony counts certainly was a surprise. Of course, you're all professionals in the courtroom. You're not allowed to really express any emotion, but did you get any sort of audible gasp when that was?
You're listening into this press conference here on Live Now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. Thank you so much for continuing to join us. And of course, we're getting the new indictment, the new information coming out of this indictment from the DA there, Alvin Bragg, and is going to step to the podium here momentarily as a major monumental case. You can see some poster boards on hand at this courthouse there in Manhattan, as you can see the catch and kill scheme, as I referenced during several of those statements. Of course, expecting this press conference to begin momentarily here on Live Now from Fox. Alvin Bragg, I don't know how much remarks he will make, if he will answer questions. If not, we've also heard a little bit from our Fox 5 team there in New York about just what they heard, what they saw from inside the courtroom. Their Fox 5 team, Morgan Mackay, was inside the courtroom talking about just some of the functions, the protocols going through with their talking about the demeanor of former President Donald Trump, staring directly ahead for some time, but also very much involved in paying attention to what his lawyers had to say, what some of the prosecutors had to say during this arraignment there. He was processed. Of course, we do know that spared a mugshot and handcuffs. Of course, Donald Trump, the former president, turned himself in on Tuesday after being indicted on those charges of a hush money payment during his 2016 campaign. Of course, Alvin Bragg called it a, quote, kill and a, quote, catch and kill scheme. So we will continue to follow this. No booking photo to become out. Only the photos that we saw were just a few of these that we saw here on Live Now from Fox. I want to put it up just so you can see what we are seeing from those images from earlier today. As you can see, these were the images of former President Trump inside the courtroom looking very stoic. And now Alvin Bragg stepping to the podium. Let's listen in here to this on Live Now from Fox.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here today. Earlier this afternoon, Donald Trump was arraigned on a New York Supreme Court indictment returned by a Manhattan grand jury on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about. 34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct. The defendant repeatedly made false statements on New York business records. He also caused others to make false statements. The defendant claimed that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. This simply was not true. And it was a false statement that the defendant made month after month in 2017. April, May, June, and so on through the rest of the year. For 9 straight months, the defendant held documents in his hand containing this key lie, that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. And he personally signed checks for payments to Michael Cohen for each of these 9 months. In total, the grand jury found there were 34 documents with this critical false statement. Why did Donald Trump repeatedly make these false statements? The evidence will show that he did so to cover up crimes relating to the 2016 election. Donald Trump, executives at the publishing company American Media Incorporated, Mr. Cohen, and others agreed in 2015 to a catch and kill scheme. That is, a scheme to buy and suppress negative information to help Mr. Trump's chance of winning the election. As part of this scheme, Donald Trump and others made 3 payments to people who claimed to have negative information about Mr. Trump. To make these payments, They set up shell companies, and they made yet more false statements, including, for example, in AMI, American Media Incorporated's business records. One of the three people that they paid to keep quiet was a woman named Stormy Daniels. Less than 2 weeks before the presidential election, Michael Cohen wired $130,000 to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. That payment was to hide damaging information from the voting public. The participant scheme was illegal. The scheme violated New York election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. The $130,000 wire payment exceeded the federal campaign contribution cap, and the false statements in AMI's books violated New York law. That is why Mr. Trump made false statements about his payments to Mr. Cohen. He could not simply say that the payments were a reimbursement for Mr. Cohen's payments to Stormy Daniels. To do so, to make that true statement, would have been to admit a crime. So instead, Mr. Trump said that he was paying Mr. Cohen for fictitious legal services in 2017 to cover up actual crime committed the prior year. And in order to get Michael Cohen his money back, they planned one last false statement. In order to complete the scheme, they planned to mischaracterize the repayments to Mr. Cohen as income to the New York State tax authorities. The conduct I just described and that which was charged by the grand jury is felony criminal conduct in New York State. True and accurate business records are important everywhere, to be sure. They are all the more important in Manhattan, the financial center of the world. That is why we have a history in the Manhattan DA's office of vigorously enforcing white-collar crime. My office, including the talented prosecutors you saw at arraignment earlier today, has charged hundreds of felony falsifying business records. This charge, it can be said, is the bread and butter of our white-collar work. And fraud presents itself in all different forms here in Manhattan. We have charged falsifying business records for those who violated federal bank secrecy laws. We have charged falsifying business records for those who were seeking to cover up sex crimes. And we have brought this charge for those who committed tax violations. At its core, this case today is one with allegations like so many of our white-collar cases. Allegations that someone lied again and again to protect their interests and evade the laws to which we are all held accountable. As this office has done time and time again, we today uphold our solemn responsibility to ensure that everyone stands equal before the law. No amount of money and no amount of power changes that enduring American principle. I'll now take questions.
So we're going to take a limited number of questions. There are no follow-up questions. One question per reporter. I will call on you. And again, we have limited time. Thank you. First question will be Rick.
Thank you. Ricky, why now? Some argue that this is a political move. You're not going to be a political person. The Rick is going to go into.
We conducted a thorough and rigorous investigation, as we're known to do, at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I've been doing this for 24 years and am no stranger to rigorous, complex investigations. I bring cases when they're ready. Having now conducted a rigorous, thorough investigation, the case was ready to be brought, and it was brought.
Mr. Rack, the indictment says that there were 34 false business records. And they would then conceal another crime, but the indictment does not specifically say what those crimes were. We are assuming perhaps that they might be election related. I'm wondering if you can specify what laws were all broken.
Sure. So let me say as an initial matter that the indictment doesn't specify that because the law does not so require. In my remarks, I mentioned a couple of laws, which I will highlight again now. The first is New York State election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. I further indicated a number of unlawful means, including more additional false statements, including statements that were planned to be made to tax authorities. I also noted the federal election law cap on contribution limits.
But why weren't there those crimes charged? Why weren't they charged with those crimes?
Well, I'm not going to go into our deliberative process on what was brought. The charges that were brought were the ones that were brought. The evidence in the law is the basis for those decisions.
You had expressed a year ago that you had some reservations about the case's readiness. Can you talk to us about what were some of the questions in your mind that needed to be answered in order to bring a case with this magnitude?
I'm not going to go chapter and verse into any thinking. What I will say is, I believe the time period you're talking about, I've been in office for a couple of months. The investigation, in my view, was not concluded into the conduct in particular that is the basis for the charges today. Since that time, we've had more evidence made available to the office and opportunity to meet with additional witnesses. So as I said earlier, I've been doing this for 24 years. I don't bring cases prior to a thorough and rigorous investigation. Now, having done so, the case has been brought.
Mr. Bragg, Garrett Hake with NBC News. Your predecessor took a hard look at this case and decided not to charge it. Federal prosecutors took a hard look at this case and decided not to charge it. Do you believe you have new evidence that led you to decide to charge this, or why now?
Well, as I just mentioned, we have had available to the office additional evidence that was not in the office's possession prior to my time here. And as to your part of your question about the federal, we have a distinct and strong, I would say profound, independent interest in New York State. This is the business capital of the world. We regularly do cases involving false business statements. The bedrock, in fact, the basis for business integrity and a well-functioning business marketplace is true and accurate record keeping. That's the charge that's brought here, falsifying New York State business records.
DA Bragg, just to read back line from your statement facts, the participants also took steps that mischaracterized for tax purposes the true nature of payments and reference to the scheme. Do you allege former President Trump was one of the participants who mischaracterized payments for tax purposes?
I'm not going to go beyond the plain language statement of facts, which I think speaks for itself.
Brad, can you please comment on the strength of the evidence that Trump personally intended violating state election law for the actions that are charged with indictment?
So the charge is falsifying business records. The charge requires, as I specified, criminal conduct that was concealed. One of the concealed crimes we allege is New York State election law. I sort of went through, and our statement of facts, which I think many of you have in front of you, goes through things including, text messages, emails, contemporaneous phone records, multiple witnesses. All of that will be, as you saw in the fall, borne out in a public courtroom in downtown Manhattan.
Our last question is Jonah.
DA Bragg, the charges related to the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, the release from your office, also mentions another woman, Karen McDougal, as well as a doorman. Can you comment on how those players are related to the charges you've brought or to the case overall?
I'm glad you put your finger on that, because it's not just about one payment. It is 34 business records, 34 false statements in business records that were concealing criminal conduct. And the earlier question about New York State election law, when I talked about conspiracy to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. Those unlawful means, we allege, include the conduct set forth in the statement of facts, which is, additional false statements separate and apart from the charged ones in AMI documents, planned false statements to taxing authorities. It is not just that one $130,000 wire payment. Thanks so much.
Mr. Bragg, any comment about any indictment violence by former president?
You were just listening in there, Alvin Bragg, relaying all the information there around this here on Live Now Fox. I am Andy Mack. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, the indictment coming down and the arraignment happening earlier today. You just heard there from the district attorney out of Manhattan on these 34 criminal charges. Of course, we're following this very closely here on Live Now Fox. I want to give you a live look outside of the courtroom right now as it's clearing out. Certainly some people leaving, as there were plenty of protesters there on both sides earlier today. Former President Trump departing. I want to put up just the image one more time of the former president leaving New York out of LaGuardia. This coming in from our Fox 5 team. As you can see, the plane there heading back to Mar-a-Lago, Florida, just after a nearly hour-long arraignment there taking place. I'm Andy Mack. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. We want to provide some legal analysis to what we're hearing earlier today, what we're learning from this indictment as we're learning more information from Alvin Bragg. We want to bring in right now Nicole DeBoard, criminal defense attorney there as well, trial lawyer. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Of course, we're just learning more information about these 34 felony counts against the former president. What's the biggest takeaway for you from what we're learning today?
Well, I think that we all thought prior to this day that these were going to be largely misdemeanor accusations. And so to see the indictment unsealed and see that it is instead largely felony accusations has been sort of the biggest surprise or the biggest takeaway from what I've learned from the unsealing from the indictment.
And obviously, you just heard from Alvin Bragg there, the DA in Manhattan. Quite a few questions, not necessarily a short press conference. He talks about the key lie, as he called it, in those 34 documents, or the 34 catch and kill scheme. Give me a breakdown of kind of what that means. What does catch and kill mean in terms of prosecution and what he was entailing in this indictment?
So what it sounds like he's alleging through the indictment is that basically the overall plan was to catch any information which would have negatively impacted the Trump campaign and to kill that story or kill that information. And so what it sounds like the allegations are about, as we're just now all learning them together, is that each of these separate 34 counts are documents wherein they're saying there were things said or put down on paper that were not true, according to the prosecution, and that these things were all designed to further the plan to catch information that the campaign did not want out there during the election and to kill that information so that it would not be a problem for campaign purposes.
And you also heard questions, as we just saw former President Trump there walking out of the courtroom from about an hour ago, as he's already on his way back there to Florida. He's expected to make some remarks in Mar-a-Lago. And we also saw him there as well. There is no gag order put in place. Are we surprised by that? Is that commonplace? And kind of what's our reaction to that? Because obviously he has a speech tonight later on, about 8:15 is expected to start. No gag order in place. Is that surprising to you? Is that common? What's your take on that?
Well, gag orders are always less common. The idea is that we all have the right to have information about what's happening in the courtroom. The public filings are available to us all to talk about and consider, as are the courtroom proceedings. And judges are generally reluctant to gag the parties from talking about things that are normally a part of the public record, things that the public wants to learn about and hear about. But what the judge did admonish the parties is that he expected them not to be offering incendiary comments or things that would somehow impact ultimately the ability of former President Trump to get a fair day in trial, if that is the direction that this court case ultimately takes.
This is certainly some unprecedented times as we're looking at Mar-a-Lago as well. And you were talking about the gag order, not necessarily common, but also this is far from common, what we're witnessing right here as the unprecedented case moving forward. We also know that potentially 8 months from now, there will be more proceedings. Does the timeline kind of fit for you? I mean, we're not going to be back in court again for several months. Is that common as well?
I'm not sure about how common that long of a, what we would call in the criminal court world, a reset would be. But practically speaking, it makes sense. There is no reason to have former President Trump come to court repeatedly while the parties argue about various discovery issues. And as they try to sort out things that need to be really resolved, at least in terms of what are we going to be fighting about when we do go back to court, that should all happen without him having to go to court, or any defendant for that matter, having to go to court needlessly and waste time and precious court resources.
Discovery is something that I think a lot of people are going to talk about, because this is the point where kind of the prosecutors kind of turn over all the information they have to the defense as well. It didn't feel like there was a ton of new information that maybe Trump's party didn't already have. Would that be fair to say?
It's hard to tell. We know what the allegations are specifically now, and so does the Trump team. So they are now aware of exactly what statutes are in play, what laws they need to be looking at, and what kinds of information they need to be digging for and trying to do their own investigation to gather. So I think that this is really just the starting line, and both sides now, the prosecution will be doing what they should be doing, which is to turn over the necessary discovery as it's required by law for them to do. And the Trump team will not only be receiving that information, but also conducting their own independent investigation of the case so that they can mount a proper defense.
Correct. And it is important to point out that obviously Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg bringing it forward, but also was part of a grand jury. So certainly some interesting notes there. I did find one of the questions asked by one of the reporters mentioning the fact that there really hasn't been they haven't moved forward with an indictment previous district attorneys. And they asked Alvin Bragg if there was some sort of new information. Does that lead you to believe that there maybe was some from the previous two district attorneys, or potentially not?
It is very possible that there was. And really, as you've already pointed out, the grand jury was guiding this investigation. So a prosecutor can go out and get things that the grand jurors are requesting and bring them to the grand jury for the grand jury to consider. But once a case is before the grand jury is really who directs that investigation. And it is possible that as time went on, the case evolved and additional information was collected that perhaps former prosecutors and or grand jurors didn't have access to, or that they viewed in a different light.
And of course, obviously following this, Nicole DeBoard, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. I think a lot of people are just kind of trying to wrap their heads around this whole ordeal. What is next? Obviously, you mentioned the long recess, but there's going to be a lot of processes within the legal battles between the two sides. Kind of what's next in the process following this arraignment?
Well, you can bet that the Trump team will be rolling up their sleeves and digging through just copious amounts of information, both that they're gathering on their own and that they're being given by the state. And then what they're going to need to do is evaluate what types of motions do they need to file to protect former President Trump in terms of his constitutional rights as this criminal case proceeds. So they've got a lot of work ahead, and I expect there will be some long hours as they go through all of these materials.
And speaking of motions, kind of what type of motions may be happening? Will it be appeal? Kind of give us a little bit of breakdown of the motions that potentially could come into play in a case like this.
Well, the very first thing this legal team will be doing, I would imagine, is taking a very close look at the pleading, and that means the indictment itself. The way that the language was used and the statutes that were cited, does this comport with what the Constitution requires and what case law requires? And if they feel there are deviations from what the law mandates be in an indictment, or constitutional problems with the charges as the way they are raised, you can expect that the lawyers will be working hard to put together motions to have the judge rule on whether or not this indictment can proceed as it is written.
Certainly a lot of information still coming out about this. He's expected to speak at Mar-a-Lago later on tonight, and potentially he's going to discuss this matter in front of the people down there. A lot of staunch supporters of them. We saw them in New York. We saw them as he departed yesterday from Florida. Potentially, if he says something, can the judge go back and put in a gag order or something like that? Or will they be paying attention to something he says both on social media and to media and the public during a very public presidential campaign?
Oh, absolutely. And I can tell you, as a defense lawyer, the scariest thing that you can watch is a client, someone who is accused of a crime with serious consequences like this one, make any kind of statement that could later be attributed to them. And so, you know, it's a fine line. On the one hand, he wants to make sure that his supporters have information. On the other hand, I can guarantee the lawyers will be biting their nails, making sure that nothing that he says can ultimately be used against him in court.
Yeah, it is got to be a tough spot for the lawyers there to both let Donald Trump be himself, but also make sure that he doesn't put jeopardy this case as well. Nicole DeBoard, any parting words before I let you go on this case, or anything else you can come to mind that our audience should know about it?
I think that we can expect a long road. I think this first 8-month reset will be just the first. And I think that we'll see a lot of complicated emotions, and we'll hear a lot more about what the state has charged and the legal issues surrounding these statutes and the way it's being applied here.
Definitely. Certainly an unprecedented time, a historical time. Nicole DeBoard, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox to give some legal perspective into this case that we saw in arraignment earlier. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much. As we continue on here on Live Now from Fox, I am Andy Mack. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we have a live look out of Mar-a-Lago, Florida, the residence of former President Donald Trump there. We saw the arraignment take about an hour earlier today. The processing, no handcuffs, no mugshot, but certainly some images from inside the courtroom as well. I want to put up those images one more time before we go to break, as certainly a busy few hours here covering all this major news. Here is the image from inside the courtroom as former President Trump arraigned on these 34 federal felony counts, there in that Manhattan courtroom. I'm Andy Mack. We're going to take a quick 2-minute break.